Thank you, Mark, and thank you to Rachel for holding our tech teva, our arc that we are sitting in today in this space. As we begin a new book in our Torah reading cycle, a new book, a pinnacle narrative in the life of our people, the book of Shemot, also known as Exodus. And we're going to focus in on a specific verse today and kind of the reworking of some of the simple, straightforward Hebrew words in this verse. We know that the Israelites have descended into Egypt. There is a new Pharaoh that has arisen that is worried lest we multiply, right? A power, fearful of our developing any type of power through our numbers. And the story of our slavery in Egypt unfolds and ultimately the redemption from slavery. So there is a specific verse in which God is looking at the Israelites, and there's this a motif that repeats throughout this parsha of looking or taking notice of. And so I want to thank Rachel for sharing the source sheet. And we'll take a look at this. As always, I will read everything on the source sheet. So if you're in a place right now where you can't be looking at this, no worries. I will share the verses and the commentary. So we read in Exodus chapter 2, God looked upon the Israelites and God knew, the literal translation here, God knew Vayeda Elohim. Also translated as God took notice of the Israelites. But the knowing here is going to be an important concept in our Hasidic teachers' reworking of this verse. And so this idea of God knowing the Israelites is going to be important in how our teachers take this and give it a new twist. So this commentary is from the Meor Einayim, a Hasidic commentator. This is translated by one of our great IJS teachers, Rabbi Jonathan Leider. And the Meor Einayim is Rabbi Menachem Nachum of Chernobyl. And so I'm going to share his commentary on this particular verse from our parsha. So in the exile of Egypt, so this time that we are in Egypt, how do we say Egypt in Hebrew? We say Mitzrayim. The people's consciousness, awareness, also known as da'at in Hebrew, or knowledge, was diminished. So here we are, we're in this place of slavery, and not only are we having a physical manifestation of what it means to be an enslaved people, also our consciousness, our awareness is restricted. And what he is doing in this commentary is he is putting some new vowels and breaking up these Hebrew letters in such a way that he's saying it's like a narrow sea. What is it like to be in Egypt? It's like being in a narrow sea. Meitzar Yam is the Hebrew. So he's switching Mitzrayim to Meitzar Yam. The stream of awareness that flows from the sea of wisdom was constricted and diminished, and the Israelites had not yet achieved an expansive consciousness. So we have, in some ways, the advantage of reading this text at the beginning of our story of slavery. We're just at the beginning of the book of Exodus, but already before we even reach the narrative that depicts the most difficult moments of being in slavery, we're also going to know this, that a descent into slavery is not just physical, it also means a constriction in consciousness. But, he continues, with Yetziat Mitzrayim, when they came out of the Metzar Yam, when they came out of this narrow sea, their consciousness of God grew and expanded. And so he's taking this verse and he's rereading actually the subject of this verse. He's saying don't read it as God, and the people, or excuse me, and God knew, right? But read it as the people, Israel knew God. So he's switching the subjects there, meaning that we as the people, Israel, had this sense of expanded consciousness in this moment. Further, he says, it says elsewhere in the Bible, you continued to grow and expand. What encouraging words, right? That we have this trajectory that we're going to be able to continue in this process, meaning that Israel's awareness and consciousness continued to grow and expand so that they could serve the Creator with pure, shining joy and delight in performing a mitzvah, a divine invitation to be in relationship with God. Israel's capacity to worship the Holy One in joy had expanded so fully since their consciousness had grown out of its constriction. So thank you, Rachel. You can take the source sheet down and unpack that a little bit. I love in a classic Hasidic move that what's happening in this text is instead of God being only in the seat of power and kind of noticing us or knowing us, that we actually have the expansion to the power to, I don't know, be in charge of our own destiny a little bit, right? Like we can take this and turn it around, right? We can expand our own divine consciousness. So again, reading this, I think we're already reading about redemption in this commentary, even though we've just barely started the story of slavery. So I think when I think about this commentary at this point, I'm like, even as I'm descending with my ancestors through this slavery story, how can I carry with me in the weeks ahead of the reading of this book? How can I carry with me that sense of expansion that is going to ultimately come when we're redeemed from Egypt, from the Mitzar Yam, from the narrow sea? And even to feel that through the throes of reading about our slavery. So the expansion in our bodies, the expansion in our souls, the expansion in our hearts, that's really what we have the opportunity to do when we come together to sit. How can we transform our own Metzar Yam, our own narrow sea, or if you want to think of it as a narrow place, which is another translation of Mitzrayim? What room do we have for any type of expansion within our bodies, within our hearts, within our souls? We enter this space today, each knowing our own sense of constriction, restriction. And can we leave our collective arc today, our collective meeting place, with just a little bit more expansion than we felt when we came into the space, even as we know that when we leave this space at a quarter after the hour or to the top of the hour, that we'll still face restrictions, constrictions, obstacles, pain, suffering. But can we just stretch or expand just that little bit more to meet the moment? So I invite you into that kavanah, that intent, into our sit today, to make contact with or become aware of the contact that already is there between our bodies and another surface, perhaps our feet on the ground, our pelvis hitting a firm cushion or chair or floor, and feeling the ribs, the abdomen, maybe placing our hands on our body to feel the miracle of that expansion that can happen just by drawing some awareness through our fingertips, touching the parts of our body that miraculously expand, how they expand and return. Whether we will it or not, they do it. The muscles, the ligaments, the tendons, the miracle of this body. And spreading up towards our chest, our heart, our shoulders. Seeing where expansion is possible. Where is there an opening for loosening? So we'll sit for the next 12 minutes or so, and I'll bring us back with a nigun, a wordless melody, before we come together for Mourner's Kaddish. Yam bai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yam bai lai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yam bai dai dai dai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai. Yai dai 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 dai. Yam bai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai yam bai, yai dai 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 dai. Yai lay lay, yai lay 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 lay. Yai lay lay, yai dai 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 dai.
As always, thank you so much, Susan, for leading us beautifully today. And let's seal the practice by offering an opportunity for those of you who are mourning, suffered a loss, if you're observing a yurt site, an anniversary of loss at this time. And if it's your custom to join in the mourner's Kaddish, you're welcome to do so. And if you're not reciting Kaddish, we encourage you to please stay present for those who are. Thanks to Rachel for sharing the words on the screen. You can put the name or names of those you're honoring in the chat now or after we recite Kaddish. If you're reciting Kaddish, please join me by rising in body or in spirit. You can unmute at this time. Yitkadal, Yitkadash,
Amen.
Amen.
Look at your text. I
Friends,
sent
thanks so
you a
much
text.
for joining us today. I want to extend our blessings for comfort for those of you who have suffered losses. That includes you, Rabbi Susan Leider, on your recent losses of your mother and your mother-in-law, and all those who are named in the chat, all those not named. We're very happy to be able to provide the space to honor the losses and grief process of those of us who are in mourning. As always, you're invited just to continue to sit if you like. You can turn the sound off on your computer. You can join us for a conversation about the beautiful teaching today that Susan offered, or ask a question, and you can put, if it's a question, as always, I encourage you to put it in the chat and preface your question by writing question in capital letters. And then I'll keep an eye out and try to work your question into our conversation. Susan, thank you again. I am feeling like this teaching today that you offered through Mayor Naim's commentary, which is just a classic, considered commentary that kind of spiritualizes, as opposed to a very literal meaning, really kind of focus on the spiritual significance of the language. And it plays with the language, but it does so in a way that's, I think, honest.
Mark, I'm sorry to interrupt. There seems
to cut to the chase,
to be
I
a big
guess
echo.
it really describes our practice as an opportunity to notice the constrictedness of our awareness. And you ended with the nigun, and it'll be great for you to kind of explain why you chose that nigun and what that refers to. But to think about this practice each day that we sit here as, for me at least, noticing, wow, my awareness is so constricted around my own narrow personal mishigas, that's going on right now. And it gives me a moment to say, wow, this is really not about me. It's about something much larger, right? That alone would be sufficient reason to sit for a few minutes and breathe. So, but what I want to start with in terms of a question is that nigun that you ended with, because it turned it into a prayer. And I wanted to invite you to explain the nigun for those of you who didn't recognize it and why you chose it and how it is a fitting amen to the teaching this today.
Thank you, Mark. Min hametzar karatiya is the Hebrew that goes with that, and I kept it as a nigun and didn't put it in the chat to kind of just free us from the Hebrew at that point. But in this conversation, this is drawn from the Psalms, and it is one of the Psalms that we sing when we say Hallel, the great series of Psalms that we say on joyous occasions. And so from the narrows, I cried out to the divine, and the divine answered me. And so those are the Hebrew words that go with that melody. There may be others, but that's what I'm aware of. I actually do not know who the composer of that nigun is, that melody. But I dare say it's a very popular melody. I'm kind of I don't know if I would say the word traditional, but it wasn't written in the last, 10 years, let's put it that way. So it may be easy to find online. Yeah, so it seemed so fitting for what the Me'oranim was doing with Mitzrayim and Metzar Yam. That's where my heart went.
I'm going to put in the chat my recent favorite musical version of that by Rabbi Deborah Sachs-Mintz that I highly recommend to people also, that singing it with Hadar. But I'm sure if you just plug in Minha Meitzar, you're going to come up with that. But when I was saying, Susan, that, I felt like a prayer, the language of I call out from this narrow sea, from this place of narrow constrictedness, or as Julie Cole wrote in the chat, this, moving from the microscope to the telescope, which I appreciated that very much. Or from the narrow angle to the wide angle, right? Really opening up the angle is to acknowledge that we need help to do that. And that the idea that God answered me ba merchab Yah in the expansiveness of Yah, right? Is that to tie it back with where you started, the verse that you chose, right? That the turning point at the beginning of Shemot, at the beginning of Exodus, is God taking note or noticing, which is an odd thing. Like that really begs unpacking. Well, why didn't God notice before? Like what's going on, right? But for me, and I'm curious about how you take that, there is a sense that expansiveness, that expansive consciousness is yearning to be known. It's not just that we need to expand our lens, as it were, but that which we are expanding our lens to be aware of actually is assisting in that process and even initiating it, waking us up, as it were, to do that. So that's how because the focus of the commentary is very much on the constriction, right? And their expansion of consciousness. But the verse is about God kind of waking up in a way which is a bit odd, I think, for the Torah to say.
Yeah. I feel like there are divine lures everywhere, right?
I like that. Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so there are divine invitations. This is language from my great teacher, Rabbi Brad Artson, about one way of translating the mitzvot. Traditionally translated as commandments, but for many of us, that language doesn't really work on a theological basis if we don't believe in a commander per se, and in negative consequences if we don't comply. But the idea that there are these divine lures, like everywhere we turn, and to pick up on Julie's beautiful metaphor, to invite us into this more expansive scoping of our environment. So yeah, so that's what came to mind for me, Mark, when you were talking about that, right? Is it's there, it wants us. It's the invitations are everywhere if only we'll kind of wake up and tune in, and say yes to the dance.
Mhm. The
So
invitation to the dance. Yeah. I like, divine lure. Is that a Brett Arton phrase
yes,
or
it
is that
is.
yours? Yeah.
So he is a wonderful contemporary theologian, among other things, but he's really worked on translating this idea of mitzvah from commandedness to invitation or lure. The idea of God is like a lover,
Hmm.
who is constantly saying, "Hey, would you like to go do this?" Or, "Hey, I'm here. Do you see me? Come into the dance, come into the moment." Someone in the chat mentioned this idea of bid for connections, which I taught about at another time. That's a similar idea offered by the psychologist John and Julie Gottman. It's the same thing. What's the bid for connection that we might be missing if we're in the narrow place?
Right. Yeah. Um, I'm going to, well, let me see. There was a question. Steve asked the question, it's the Spanish verb conocer, to know, to be familiar with, to meet, is the Hebrew word to know, which is here, ladat. Da'at itself is awareness. It's interesting that, I think, I don't know, see what do you think? I think that, I would say the kind of root has the connotation of awareness, really, less so meeting. But what do you think?
So in a biblical sense, it very much connotes intimacy and physical intimacy. So
Hmm.
there's this sense, right, of to know someone is to have intercourse with them in a
Hmm.
biblical kind of mindset,
Right.
related to exclusive monogamy and that kind of thing. I think what the Hasidic teachers are doing with this is changing it into a concept of dot, right, which is a more global awareness that doesn't have as much of a sense of intimate sexual connection as it does and Mark, chime in if you, or, push back if you feel differently. But
Oh,
I
this is
think
good.
it makes it much more on a conscious awareness level. Um, and also, I don't know, can maybe include it's not a dyad situation where it's like God, the divine, and us as an individual, but Da'at is like everyone, everything. It's very comprehensive, systemic, I guess maybe is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah. Okay, I guess I'd like to share, at our recent, I just had a silent retreat recently, in-person retreat at Garrison, New York, Garrison Institute, which, by the way, we'll be doing again next November, just to let people know. And Rabbi Nancy Flam was one of the teachers, and in a nutshell, invited us to think about, in terms of awareness, inviting us to think about objects of our awareness, or subjects of our awareness, being aware of our breath, being aware of sensation, the kind of thing we do every day in our practice here, invitation to become aware of that. And then there's awareness of awareness, becoming aware that we're aware, right? I'm aware that I'm sitting in, that I'm breathing, or that I'm sitting in the chair, that the air in the room is chill, is cool. But then, beyond that is that sense of being in the awareness itself, which is one way of understanding the divine, being in or connecting, in using your terminology of connection of, of, and in that place, we move from that place of narrowness, like, because that's a fairly narrow place. I'm aware that I'm breathing. I'm aware of my physical body. I'm aware of my sensation. That's a good thing to start with, right? But that's only a starting point. We progressively move through that becomes an anchor by which we become aware of something much larger than ourselves. I guess is what it really comes down to. And spoiler alert, in terms of the Torah, right, as you're bringing us at just beginning of this process here, this process of awakening reaches its culmination when they get to Sinai, right? When, according to our tradition, which as far as I know is, I don't know if it's another world religious tradition that where an entire group of people has access to revelation at the same time, right? It's an amazing thing. But the whole story is, in a way, it's told as a story of political liberation, etc., and that's true too. But it's also a story about spiritual liberation from exactly what you're describing today, this kind of narrowness of concern.
Mm-hmm. This topic that you were mentioning, that Nancy taught about at the Silent Retreat in November, was also a large focus of Sam Fine-Smith's course last year on the weekly tour portion, which I did, and I'm also enrolled in his current year class, which I love. But I think what happens is being aware of awareness is that is a way towards unity and oneness, right? Which is a great Hasidic concept that there is no place that is devoid of the divine.
Right.
And so that being aware of awareness, which at first you go, what? What does that mean? Like, wait a minute, what is that just gibberish? But what it really leads to is this idea of we become one with what is around us.
Right.
And that's presence, right? So there isn't a separation. And I think that's what you're saying. At first, it sounds like, well, I'm aware of awareness. Okay, here's awareness.
Right.
There's awareness, right? But that's still a state of separation. But
Right.
it's a place through which we might enter into the unity of all of ourselves, our bodies, our souls, with what is around us.
Yes, exactly. And that's, it makes this a spiritual practice, not merely, and I don't mean that pejoratively, not merely a mindfulness practice, but it's a spiritual practice of coming to understand ourselves as embodied manifestations of this, what we're calling this awareness, this larger awareness. And connecting it with yesterday's teaching from Mariposa Dueñas of recognizing that divinity within us and within each other by virtue of being made in divine image. Lover and beloved both, right, Avi? Exactly. Okay, everyone. Great stuff in the chat too today, by the way. Thank you for thank you for the beautiful contributions here. Susan, as always, really a wonderful practice, and much gratitude to you, and also for weaving together, so much of what you do in your rabbinate and in your coaching and organizational work and everything you bring into this, and also your incredible devotion to this particular community. We're really grateful to you for all of that.
Thank you, Mark.
Great to be with you. Thank you, Rachel, for holding our space. Hope to see you all tomorrow. We'll be led tomorrow by Yiska Smith, joining us from Jerusalem. I'll lead us on Friday as we sit into Shabbat together. Looking forward to that as well. Be safe and well, everyone. Many blessings to you.